Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I am Jason Della Rosa, the Herald Democrat Sports Editor, and we are about to enter the home stretch for the high school football season. We are about to enter Week 9, which means there are 3 games left. Some teams have clinched playoff spots. Some teams will try to clinch playoff spots this week. And some teams may have to wait not only until next week, but perhaps even the last week of the season to get in based on the way the standings and the schedule shake out. We're going to go through all that. We're going to look back at what happened in Week 8, and we'll see who is playing and who is not playing this week as we have teams on byes both this week, next week, and the last week of the season. To kick things off, as always, we'll start in District 7-5A Division 1, where we have the Sherman Bearcats, and they are coming off a 27-14 loss against Texas High. The Bearcats went out to Texarkana, trying to get a win to maintain a hold on what would potentially be the 4th playoff spot from the district. They were unable to do so, so they're sitting at 3-4 and 0-3 in district play. They will be hosting Wiley East on Friday night at Bearcat Stadium. Wiley East is 2-6 and 0-4. The bottom line on this one is the loser is essentially out of the playoff chase. That definitely is the case for Wiley East. They'll drop to 0-5. We still have 3 undefeated teams in the district standings. We have McKinney North sitting in first place at 4-0. You have both John Tyler and Mesquite Poteet tied in second place at 3-0. And right now, the holder of the 4th playoff spot is West Mesquite at 1-2. That is important to know because that is who Sherman plays next week. So if you're a Bearcat backer, you want to see Sherman beat Wiley East, you want to see Sherman beat West Mesquite, and then you're going to probably need Sherman to beat John Tyler to close things out. Now, depending on how things go this week and next week, that may not be an absolute necessity for the last week. There could be some sort of 3-way tiebreaker, which is how Sherman got in to the playoffs last year. But you definitely have to win this week, and you definitely have to win next week against West Mesquite. A loss, either game is probably a loss this week may not eliminate them, but a loss next week to West Mesquite would definitely do the trick. Wiley East is a program that, while they are better than they were last year, they've already won more games. They have not won a district game dating back to 2017. They've lost 11 in a row. And in 5 of the 6 losses this year, they've allowed at least 41 points. Last week, in the loss to Texas High, Sherman's passing attack was the big mode of transportation to get things going. Tate Bethel was 27 of 49 for 301 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. The main recipient was Benji Amayabu. He had 12 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown. Elijah Chapman also had 3 catches for 68 yards and a touchdown as well. Basically, there were at least 4 receivers that had at least 3 catches. It was balanced attack through the air. The problem for the Bearcats was the running game did not fare very well. Sherman had 31 carries for 58 yards. They were down 13-0 after the first quarter. They were up 14-13 going to the 4th quarter. So it was a close game there. And then Texas High jumped ahead 20-14. And then as Sherman was trying to drive in the final minutes, an interception return on 4th down gave Texas High the 2 touchdown advantage and eventually the win. Sherman's sitting a half game behind Texas High. So like I said, you need Texas High to lose out. You need West Mesquite to lose out potentially. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there with the Bearcats going into these final games of the season. The next game on the schedule is in District 7-5A Division 2. That is Denison hosting Frisco Memorial. Denison is 5-2 and 4-1 in district play after they beat Frisco last week 10-7. And Frisco Memorial is 1-7 and 0-6. They lost a close one to Lake Dallas 34-29. To touch on Denison's win last week, that was a major victory for the Yellow Jackets because Frisco was undefeated on the season. They were 7-0 and 5-0 in district play. So the standings are pretty simple out there. You have Denison is still in second place, but it's a log jam there. You have Denton, Braswell, Lovejoy, and Denison are all 4-1. Like we mentioned, Frisco is 5-1. They have the district bye this week, so you're looking at if Denison beats Memorial, which you would think would happen because Memorial is 1-7 on the season, and then you have Braswell is playing Princeton, and you have Lovejoy playing like Dallas. We could have, going into the final 2 weeks of the season, a 4-way tie for first place, everybody sitting at 5-1. And the kicker to that is next week, Denison goes to Lovejoy, and then the week after that, Denison hosts Denton Braswell. So everything is going to be sorted out here in the last couple of weeks. The only way that Denison clinches a playoff spot is if Denison wins and Frisco Reedy loses. Frisco Reedy is hosting Lebanon Trail. The way things are shaking out in this district is odds are Denison's probably not going to be able to clinch until the last week of the season, just based on the schedules and the round-robin nature of who's playing who and that sort of thing. But the exciting thing could potentially be a 4-way tie for first place going into the final 2 weeks of the season, and nobody having clinched a playoff spot because of that. So Memorial opened the season with a win against Salina, 16-14, and since then they've had a couple close games. Like we mentioned last week, they lost by 5. They lost by 2 against Lebanon Trail. But this is a second-year program. Last year, Denison won this game 59-14. It wasn't really even that close. And Denison's defense is playing at an extremely high level, like we mentioned. They held a Frisco team that had scored at least 31 points in every game to just 7. They held them to 159 total yards, and that's including a 77-yard touchdown run in the third quarter. Everything else, that's more than half of the yardage right there. And Denison got enough on offense. They were up 3-0 at halftime on Reese Stangy's 35-yard field goal. And then after Frisco went ahead on the second play of the third quarter, Denison put together a touchdown drive, and Asa Osborne scored off of that with a 2-yard run. The numbers for Denison weren't exactly great. Like we mentioned, Frisco had 159 yards of offense. Denison was a little bit better. They had about 240 yards. They had 176 yards rushing, but it took 63 carries to get there. So it was very much a rock fight. It was very much a lot of third 3-and-out punt, first down and punt. Denison had 4 turnovers. Frisco had 2. And it was close throughout, and Denison was able to hang on. They stopped a fourth and short in their territory as Frisco was trying to retake the lead in the final couple minutes, and then they were able to run out the final minutes to preserve that win. So hopefully this isn't a trap game for Denison. You're coming off a big win, and you've got 2 big games to close out, and you're playing a team that is sitting in last place and has been eliminated from the chase. So. Be interesting to see how the Jackets come out and handle their business on Friday night at Munson Stadium. We move now to District 5-3A Division 1, and I will start by mentioning that Van Alstyne has the district bye this Friday. They are not. Actually, we jumped over 4-3A Division 1, which is where Whitesboro has a bye. So let me back up there. And say that Whitesboro has the bye in District 4-3A Division 1 this Friday. They are currently sitting in 4th place. Pilot Point is 4-0. Boyd and Brock are tied for second at 2-1 in the district standings, and Whitesboro is sitting at 4-4 and 2-2 in district after they lost last week, 38-3. The Bearcats weren't able to really get anything going. They got a field goal in the first quarter, and it was only 7. They were only down 7-3 at halftime, but Brock was able to pull away. They scored 21 points in the third quarter, and then tacked on some more in the fourth quarter. Whitesboro only finished with about 125 yards offense, so good time for a bye, maybe regroup, and we'll see how they finish out the season. They're in a decent spot to earn a playoff berth. They still have Ponder, who's sitting at 1-3 in the district standings, and they have Boyd. And depending on how things go this week, they might be able to clinch. There's a couple different scenarios there. But ultimately next week when they play at Ponder, if they win that, they're probably going to clinch a playoff spot. So they're still in a good spot. There's 3 teams below them. They've beaten Paradise and they've beaten Bowie. The only question right now is going to be what Ponder does. Ponder plays Brock this week, and so basically it will come down to if Whitesboro wins at Ponder next Friday, then that will get them in. So now we'll hop back up to District 5-3A Division 1. So I got ahead of myself there. Van Alstyne, like I mentioned, is the team that has the bye this week. They are 4-4 overall and 3-1 in district play after they beat Commerce last week 46-36. This was a game that got off to a very fast start in the first quarter. But after the first 12 minutes, Commerce had a 21-14 lead, and then they didn't score for the next 2 quarters. Van Alstyne scored 3 times. 2 times. 2 touchdowns and a field goal in the second quarter to jump in front for good. And then Commerce, like I said, didn't get on the board until a pair of touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And by then, Van Alstyne had opened up a pretty good lead. The main offensive guys in that game leading the way for Van Alstyne, Timothy Rosenthal, the quarterback, was 12 of 16 passing for 200 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Both of those went to Draylon Davis. He finished with 6 catches for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he also returned a kickoff, 93 yards for a score. Jake Carroll led the rushing attack. He had 15 carries for 101 yards and a touchdown, and Zach Monsier and Jaden Mahan also had touchdown runs for the Panthers. So they're in a really good spot. They're in a position where they're in second place. Pottsboro is 4-0. We'll get to them here in a second. Van Alstyne sitting at 3-1. Emory Rains is sitting at 2-1, and then you have Howe at 2-2, Commerce at 1-2, and then Lone Oak and Bonham are both 0-3. And this is another situation where a couple of different things have to happen for if Van Alstyne were to potentially clinch a playoff berth this week. They still have Howe on their schedule, so they'll be watching to see what happens there. They'll also be watching the next game that we're going to be talking about. In addition to Howe at Commerce, Pottsboro is hosting Rains. So you have a situation where if Rains can pull that upset, you could potentially have a 3-way tie at some point because Rains' only loss is against Van Alstyne. So it will be interesting to see what happens, but the way things are looking is Van Alstyne's probably going to have to wait till next week to clinch their playoff spot with a rivalry victory over Howe. But there's a pretty good chance that's what that game's going to come down to, and that may be a win and get in for either one of those teams, which we'll get to when we get to Howe here in a moment. The Bulldogs will be traveling to Commerce, and Howe is 3-5 on the season and 2-2 in district after they blasted Lone Oak last week 42-6, and we mentioned that Commerce lost that shootout against Van Alstyne, so they're sitting at 2-5 and 1-2. So this is a big game for playoff positioning. Like we mentioned, Howe is sitting in 4th place right now, right in front of Commerce. Commerce essentially has to win this game to have a chance at the playoffs. Howe is in a really, really good spot. They can't clinch this week because of potential 3-way tiebreakers because they still have a game against the game against Van Alstyne, and depending on how things shake out there could be some wacky things. But they will have all but clinched if they win this game on Friday. So a really nice bounce back season if that is the case for Howe, which last year they went winless in district play, and they've got a chance to jump right into the playoffs immediately. So that's a good thing there. Commerce is a better team than last year as well. They've already won more games than they did last year. Its only win period, not just in district overall last year, was against Howe in this matchup, and it was a 40-14 Commerce victory. So it's big stakes in this game. Howe's going to go on the road, so that'll be interesting. But they've put up points in the games they've won so far. They put up 66 points against Bonham in the district opener, and they beat a Lone Oak team that had just made a coaching change a couple days before the week started. So the Bulldogs are in a good spot for sure, and we'll see what they can do in regards to moving really close to clinching that playoff spot. And the last game in District 5 3A is the district-leading Pottsboro Cardinals. They come in with an 8-0 overall record and a 4-0 record in district. They have clinched a playoff spot and a victory over Rains, who is 4-3 and 2-1 in district. Would clinch the top seed for the playoffs and at least a share of the district title. They'd be in position to go undefeated in district play after they have a bye. And so basically the story of Pottsboro's season has basically been their offense. They're just putting up major numbers. The defense hasn't been too shabby either. But 3 of the last 5 games, Pottsboro scored at least 60 points. That includes the last week's 61-6 victory against Bonham. That was a game where you had the Cardinals were, if I can find that there, they ran for 363 yards. Cy Shope with the big day. He had 9 carries for 191 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jet Carroll also contributed a big day. He had 14 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. In addition to his running, Shope also connected with Titus Lyons for a 38-yard touchdown pass. And Jason Hooker returned a punt, 43 yards for a touchdown. This was another game, it was 37-6 at halftime. And so that's kind of what Pottsboro's been able to do. They've kind of rolled up some big halftime scores and kind of cruised from there. They held Bonham to 134 yards. Bonham had 31 carries for negative 17 yards. So another great all-around performance for Pottsboro. Bonham kicked a pair of field goals. That's how they got their points. Rains, outside of the loss to Van Alstyne, which was by 8 points in the district opener, Rains has been better of late. They've won 4 of the 5 with that lone loss being to Van Alstyne. And like I said, this is a really key game because if Rains is able to pull the upset, you could potentially have a 3-way tie for first place. But if Pottsboro takes care of business, like many expect them to be able to do, then that will allow them to clinch the top seed. And then we'll put Van Alstyne, like we said, in a really good spot to potentially get the second seed going into the last couple games of the season. So interesting things, plenty of action still to determine what's going to happen there in District 5 3A Division 1. In Division 5 3A Division 2, the district-leading Gunner Tigers have the bye this week. They were able to clinch their playoff spot with the victory last week in a really big battle in that district, battle of 2 undefeated teams. Gunner had to rally at home 31-27 against City View. This is a game where Gunner jumped on top early. It was 14 after the end of the first quarter, and Gunner was down 27-14 going into the second half, and they were down 27-17 going to the fourth quarter. But as has been the case, Peyton Lowe came up big in the second half. Hudson Graham, the quarterback, came up with some clutch throws. He got with Lowe for a 24-yard touchdown pass, basically the first play of the fourth quarter, and then Gunner got the ball back pretty quick. A couple minutes later, Lowe caught a 31-yard touchdown pass. That put Gunner ahead, and they were able to hang on. That was a key game because you had Gunner, Henrietta, and City View all came into the game undefeated. So the winner of the Gunner City View game was going to stay there, and Henrietta ended up losing to Holiday 13-0. So Gunner's in first place. They're in a good spot. They have to play Henrietta next week when they come off their bye, and so that'll basically determine who gets the top seed and who gets the second seed. Although Henrietta and City View are playing this week, so it might be a little easier to figure out how things are going after we see what happens with them this week. And the other game in District 5 3A Division 2 this Friday is the SNS Rams are hosting Nocona. SNS is coming off its first win of the season. They are 1-7 and 1-3 in district. They beat Callisburg 25-7, and Nocona is coming off the district bye. They are 3-4 overall and 1-2. SNS snapped their 18-game losing streak, and that gave the new head coach Josh Alleman his first career victory. So that's a good milestone victory right there. And so hopefully SNS can finish on a good note. They do have an outside shot at the playoffs. I know that's kind of hard to believe, but if they somehow can beat Nocona, this was a game that was not close last year, but if they somehow pull that out, they can be in that position for the fourth playoff spot. But either way, it's obviously an improvement over last year. Things are getting better for the Rams. Jake Reynolds had 4 touchdown passes in the win over Callisburg last week. He only threw for 123 yards, but he connected with Blake Smith twice. Nathaniel Rainey had a touchdown catch, and Cannon Falagi had a touchdown catch as well. And the defense did really well for SNS. They held Callisburg to just 87 yards on 34 carries, and they only had 42 yards passing. And they came up with 5 turnovers. 2 of those were interceptions by Blake Smith. And Callisburg only had 6 first downs. So, like I said, that's a nice bright spot for the Rams. And maybe they could kind of find themselves in this mix over the last couple of weeks. We'll see what happens when they host Nocona on Friday night. Moving down to District 9 3A Division 2, we will talk about the big game of the week that unfortunately could have been bigger, but was not. It was not the fault of the Bells Panthers, who traveled to Blue Ridge. They are the district leader. They are the only undefeated team in district. They are 4-3 and 3-0, and they are taking on second place Blue Ridge, who is 4-3 and 2-1. While Bells won last week, 35-7 against Parish Chisholm, Blue Ridge had a chance to also be 3-0. And set up a really big showdown for first place, but they ended up losing 51-26 against Leonard, which is interesting because that's a team that Bells beat Leonard earlier in the season. So we could have had a showdown for, winner stays undefeated, loser gets that first district loss. But it still was a huge game because the standings in this district, if you thought 7-5A Division 2 with Denison was crazy, this is a really interesting district because you have Bells at 3-1. So they're clear of everybody. If they keep winning, they're in really good shape. You have Blue Ridge at 2-1. You have Cooper and Leonard are both sitting at 2-2, and you have Whiteright and Prairieland sitting at 1-2. So nobody has clinched anything. Everything is still up for grabs, and it's probably going to come down to the last week for a lot of these games. Bells would be in a really good spot. Again, I don't think they're going to clinch this week because of the other matchups in the district. We'll get to Leonard at Whiteright next, but also Prairieland is at Chisholm. And so even if Prairieland were to lose to Chisholm, who is 0-3, there would still be too many teams potentially that would be in the mix there. So we'll just have to see what happens. There'd have to be a couple things to happen there. But Bells has got it together. Especially, like I said, once they've been in district. They scored at least 35 points in every district game. The thing to note about Blue Ridge is they've allowed at least 46 points in each of their losses. And this was a close game last year. Blue Ridge won it 21-14. Bells really struggled to get anything going in that one, and Blue Ridge was able to hang on. But like we said, the Panthers are rolling right now. In that 35-7 victory last week, they were up 14-0 at halftime. And then Caden Pyle returned the second half kickoff, 75 yards for a touchdown. So then they were up 21-0, and they were kind of able to kind of cruise from there. They finished with 287 yards all on the ground, which is typical of the slot T offense that Coach West runs before at Collinsville and now at Bells. Wrangler Priest led the way. He had 16 carries for 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bo Baker added 11 carries for 77 yards, and Grady Waldrop and Blake Rowland had short touchdown runs as they were able to kind of run away from Chisholm. So Bell's in a really good spot. There is a chance they could clinch a playoff spot, but it's a very messy district, like we mentioned, and going to be a couple different factors as to how that gets taken care of on Friday. And the reason for that, one of those games, like we mentioned, Leonard is visiting Whiteright. Both of these teams well in the thick of things. It was the same way it was last year when Whiteright was able to come away with a 20-16 win. Whiteright is 4-3 and 1-2. Leonard is 4-4 and 2-2. They both won last week. Leonard won, like we mentioned, 51-26 against Blue Ridge, and Whiteright was able to knock off defending district champ Cooper, who is down at 2-2. They won that game 28-13. Last year's win by Whiteright had snapped Leonard's 7-game winning streak in the series. And the last time Whiteright beat Leonard 2 years in a row, it's been a while. 2004 and 2005 was the last time that happened. But Leonard's hot. They had the big win against Blue Ridge. They had a big win the week before that. They scored 113 points the last 2 weeks combined. So it's going to be looking to shut down DJ Brown. Had a big game last week. Got some statewide recognition for that. So he's the focal point for Whiteright to be able to stop them. In terms of what Whiteright was able to do against Cooper, they were able to get up. They were 14-0 at halftime. And then it was kind of back and forth in the second half. Marshall Mangrum, the quarterback, he had a big game. He threw a pair of touchdown passes to Caden Caraway, and he also ran for a couple of scores. And then Dylan Cordell paced the rushing attack. He had 12 carries for 112 yards. Mangrum finished 15-22 passing for 200 yards. Like we mentioned, Caraway, 5 catches, 67 yards, and the 2 TDs. Ryan Godby had 3 catches for 61 yards. And the defense played, like I said, really well. They were able to hold the defending district champ to 13 points, and so sets them up for a chance to make a run. Whiteright and Bell still have to play, so that could be interesting if Whiteright is able to win this game again this year. And they finish with Prairieland, so there's, like I said, there's a lot of matchups that are going to depend on who wins each week to see how the standings change on a weekly basis. We get down to District 5-2A next. Just a couple more games left on the schedule. One of those teams that is on a bye is Collinsville. They are sitting at 3-5 and 0-2 after they lost last week 22-14 against Tom Bean. Collinsville is not in a bad spot, but basically what's going to end up happening is their opportunity to make the playoffs is going to come down to their game against Celeste. When we look at the district standings, Valley View is 2-0 and they have clinched a playoff spot. Both Trenton and Tom Bean, who we'll get to here in a second, they're both 1-0, and then Collinsville and Celeste are both 0-2. Now it's 5-team district, 4 teams go. So basically, Collinsville beats Celeste and they get in. If they lose to them, then they're going to be in trouble based on the other results in the district. So that's the easiest way for Collinsville to get in. They'll see what happens this week in the district. Celeste is going to be at Tom Bean. We'll talk about that game. And Trenton's at Valley View. So one of those teams is going to get their first loss in district play. But Collinsville's struggling. It's offensively, not really defensively. They fell behind 22-0 against Tom Bean. And then Luis Hernandez had a couple of touchdown passes. First to Justin Hernandez and then Nathan Bocanegra. But both of those were in the fourth quarter as they tried to rally. And they weren't able to pull that off. So another team that's a good week for them to get a bye. Hopefully regroup for their last 2 games. They've got to win one of them, and it's got to probably be that Celeste game. So we'll see what the Pirates can come up with in regards to that. Collinsville will be rooting for Tom Bean as they host Celeste on Friday. Like we mentioned, the Tomcats opened district play with that 22-14 victory against Collinsville after Tom Bean started with the bye. Tom Bean's on a roll. They've won 3 in a row, trying to make it 4 in a row. And if they do that, that's their most wins in a row since they opened the 2008 season with the 5-0 start. Celeste is 1-7 and 0-2. The graduation really hit them hard. They had a really good team last year. I think we've talked about them in playing some of the other teams in non-district play. The 7 losses this year, it's more than the previous 2 years combined. In 17 and 18, they had 4 total losses. So this is another situation where they have a chance with Tom Bean. They could earn back-to-back playoff berths for the first time since 2003, 2004, and that's only the 3rd time in program history that would have happened to get 2 straight playoff appearances. If Tom Bean wins, they do clinch a playoff spot. Obviously, if they lose, they are not out of it. But and if they do win, like we mentioned, Trenton and Valley View are playing. The winner of that and Tom Bean, if they do win, would be the only undefeated teams, and that would set up a showdown potentially for the district championship between an undefeated Tom Bean and then either an undefeated Trenton or an undefeated Valley View. So that's kind of where we sit with the Tomcats. They've had a really good month. The offense is clicking. They won last week. Ryan Weems caught a touchdown pass, threw a touchdown pass to Lance Pauler, and ran for a touchdown to basically account for all the other ones. He caught the touchdown pass from Zach Lusk. Caleb Graham grinded out 91 yards on 24 carries. Lance Pauler, we mentioned, had the touchdown catch. 5 receptions for 107 yards. And Lusk finished with 4 catches for 79 yards. So the Tomcats have definitely turned this season around. If they keep that going, they'll be in a good spot. If not, have clinching a playoff spot, they'll be in a good spot next week to get that taken care of. And the last game in District 9-2A Division 2, we have a battle for first place between the Munster Hornets and the Tioga Bulldogs. This is a situation where Munster had the bye last week in district, but they did play a non-district game. They won 46-22 against Cedar Hill Newman, and Tioga opened district play last week with a 20-14 win against Era. So Munster is 6-2 and 1-0. Tioga is 3-4 and 1-0. This is another situation where Tioga has already surpassed last season in a big way. Last year they only won 1 game, so they've already tripled their win total, which is good for them. Munster is the defending district champion, and so we'll see how things shake out in this one. In the win last week against Era, Caleb McKinney ran 17 times for 119 yards and a touchdown. He also was 11 of 24 passing for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. Marshall Lease had 7 catches for 102 yards and a TD, and Logan Westbrook's lone catch was an 8-yard touchdown. And then Caleb Scott chipped in 50 yards on 11 carries, and he also had 3 receptions for 33 yards. That was a close game, closer than maybe some people thought. Era was 0-6 coming into their first district game. And so basically the way things look, and we mentioned this before in this district, there's only 4 teams, so all of them have already clinched playoff spots. All of these games are for seeding, so at the very worst, the victory over Era probably is going to get Tioga at worst a 3 seed. And like I said, the winner of this game has an inside track not only to the district championship but also on the top seed for district. And then Tioga still has to play Cumbie. Cumbie has the bye this week, and Era is going to play Peaster in a non-district game. So that's another situation where the seeding is probably not going to be decided until the final week of the season, just because the district is so small and there's tiebreakers that have to be worked out. But if Tioga was able to pull off the win over Munster, it would go a long way towards potentially getting not only the top seed but also maybe a district title as well, which would be good since it's only the second year that the Bulldogs have moved up to 11-man football after having some great success as a 6-man program. So we'll see what happens there. And that is not only a look back at Week 8, but to preview Week 9. Playoffs are right around the corner, and I know everybody's excited for that. We'll see who can somehow get in next week, and then potentially what might set up for the final week of the season. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.